Welcome to the course, everybody. We're going to start this course by first looking at the easiest question type that you can get in IELTS Writing Task 2. And by doing that, we'll be able to focus on some of the basics of writing in these early lectures. Things like idea development, things like basic structure, and things like that. So let's get started. This question here, let's read it out together, and I want you to think about what kind of question it is. There seems to be an increasing trend towards assessing students through exams rather than through continual assessment. What are the advantages and disadvantages of exams as a form of assessment? Okay, so hopefully you're telling me that this is a discussion essay, and you would be right if you were saying that. So we'll write that in first of all. You have a discussion essay. That is step 1 in terms of planning our response. If you haven't heard of these steps, I recommend checking out the Planning Your Response lecture in my Task 2 video course. So discussion essay is the first thing we do. The second thing we do is to identify and highlight keywords. So let's do that now. Maybe you can think about what the keywords are here. I would say the keywords might be things like an increasing trend, it's happening more and more. We could reference that in the introduction. Assessing students through exams, so this idea of assessment, not just the exams itself, but the assessment. We will talk about that within the course of the essay, rather than through continual assessment. So we're measuring it really against continual assessment. That provides a little bit of context. Maybe we'll add the rather than in there as well. Okay, and then we just have simply what are the advantages and disadvantages of exams as a form of assessment. However, it's not quite as simple as that. Do notice that they're not asking you primarily about continual assessment. Some people will make the mistake of writing about the advantages and disadvantages of exams and then the advantages and disadvantages of continual assessment. You're not really being asked about that. You're being asked about exams as a form of assessment, and continual assessment can provide a sense of context to put those advantages and disadvantages against. If you don't know what I mean by that, don't worry, it's going to come up later in this essay. But primarily, we're focusing on exams, and it's very important to acknowledge that. Okay, so now we have our keywords. Maybe we'll just put this here as well. I mean, it's pretty obvious we're talking about advantages and disadvantages, but helpful to just put that in. Now we have our keywords. We can now think about writing a plan. Again, planning, very, very important. Do have a look at the planning lecture in the Task 2 video course if you haven't seen it yet. Planning, you should not need to plan your introduction or your conclusion. We should be able to rely on formulas to help us here. The body paragraphs are much more important, so we're going to spend time planning those. The whole plan, ideally, should take no longer than 5 minutes. It will take a little bit longer when I'm talking about it in this video, because talking adds up the time. If you were just writing, it would obviously be much faster. Really, really simple when it comes to the structure of discussion essays. That's why we're looking at these first. You just go advantages in the first body paragraph, that's the theme there, and the second body paragraph is about the disadvantages of what we are being asked about, which is exams as a form of assessment. So the structure, super, super simple. Intro, advantages, disadvantages, conclusion. When it comes to planning the body paragraphs themselves, the lecture on building body paragraphs would be quite helpful here, but this is what I'm going to do. Okay, so what I have here are a number of different letters, and each letter corresponds to a different type of sentence. This first one is our topic sentence. This will contain our main argument, our main point, as well as the main theme of the paragraph. We'll follow it with a support sentence to back up that point, and we'll follow that with an example. And then, because we're asked about advantages, plural, we're going to then write about another advantage, still staying with the same theme, advantages of exams as a form of assessment, and then we'll support that as well. And then we will do pretty much the same thing below with the disadvantages, but we'll come to that in a moment. So we've got to think of some ideas. Advantages. Advantages of exams as a form of assessment. The first one that comes to mind for me is that they don't leave any room, is a nice way of putting it. They don't leave any room for cheating. So we'll say no room for cheating. It's much harder to cheat in an exam than it is when you have continual assessment, which often takes place at home with assignments and things like that. So with the support sentence, we're saying why. Why is it that exams are better at cutting out cheating? And here is where we have an advantage to show our topic-related vocabulary. We can talk about the presence of an invigilator, the person who is in the exam room and is watching to try and detect any signs of cheating. So I'm just going to put the word invigilator here, and I will turn it into a sentence later. When you're in your plan, try not to overdevelop your ideas when you're planning. You can save that for when you are actually writing. Here, your plan is designed to give you prompts to remind you of your original idea so that you can speed up when you're actually in the writing process. Example. In a way, we've already given an example of how exams limit cheating. Because we've used the example of an invigilator, we can still write it like a support sentence. So maybe here, it might actually be better to use the alternative, which is continual assessment, and explain how that is a little bit worse. Remember, this is not the primary purpose of the paragraph. We're looking at the advantages of exams as a form of assessment, but they have mentioned this in the task, so it's good to reference continual assessment. It's not the purpose of the paragraph, but it's good to include within the paragraph. So we could say that continual assessment, in contrast, increases the risk of plagiarism. Be very careful with the spelling of this word. It's often misspelt, so we've got the risk of plagiarism because assignments are often completed at home in the company of the internet. It's quite much easier to cheat through plagiarizing in that way. Let's think of another advantage. I would say exams are also more time efficient. Let's put that in there. It seems pretty self-explanatory why. They tend to only appear once or twice a year. So 1, 2 per year. Whereas continual assessment, of course, takes place many, many times throughout the year so that you're graded continually. If we think about the disadvantages now, move on to the contrasting paragraph. Again, we want to come up with the same sort of structural plan, but we'll do it one at a time this time instead of all at once. So we'll start with the topic sentence here. And actually in this topic sentence, I'm just going to say that there are disadvantages. I'm going to separate it from the actual disadvantages itself. So we're just going to say that there are some problems to this approach. You don't always have to include the actual problem or disadvantage itself. If it seems like it fits better in a second sentence, feel free to do that as long as things are cohesive. So we're going to explain with an example one of the problems. So that's something nice we can do. We can say there are a number of advantages. For example, this one. There are a number of problems. For example, this one. So we're using an example sentence to illustrate one of the disadvantages. And one of those is that there's a lot of pressure in exams, and pressure can actually harm performance, I would say. Certainly for some students, very, very intelligent, but when they get into an exam, that high pressure situation can disrupt their mental flow, and that can really harm their results. And I think I'm just going to emphasize that point even further in the following sentence. So we're just going to add a support sentence here explaining that even the brightest students, the most intelligent students, can perform poorly because exams are of such high pressure nature. So the brightest students can perform poorly. Not all the time, but some of the time. Okay, and hopefully you can imagine what kind of sentence is going to come next. Just like advantages, we've got disadvantages. So we've got a second point here, or if you will, a second example. However you want to write it, it really doesn't matter about the letters. The letters won't appear, but as long as they help you to structure your thoughts, that's the purpose here. So another disadvantage, another problem, another example of a problem is I would say the narrow range, a nice expression here, the narrow range of information that the student is tested on. So the student might revise everything in the syllabus, but when they actually come to the exam, they're only tested on a small amount of information because there isn't enough time for them to show their understanding of everything. And the consequence of that, we're going to add the support sentence here, the consequence of that is that you don't really get to test students in full. So it's not really like a full test of their knowledge. Okay, now of course that took a bit of time today. As we progress through these lectures, through these essays, these plans should pick up in speed unless I really want to emphasize particular points. But for now, I think that looks pretty good, and we can move over into actually writing the response. So we're going to leave this over here and move into the introduction now. Okay, so introduction. For a little bit of help on introductions, I'd recommend watching the introductions video in the Task 2 course. But one thing that I do recommend is having a selection of phrases that you can use to start essays. So different expressions will be used to start different essays. You can't rely on just one for all different types of essays, but if you have a selection behind you, then you should have some adaptability and it shouldn't take you too long to get started. I think today, it's okay to use in recent years. So we can see this increasing trend. Increasing trend sort of suggests that something is changing over time. And if that's the case, in recent years is going to be quite appropriate. We can talk about how this is changing or has been changing in recent years, because in recent years requires us to use the present perfect or the present perfect continuous. So in recent years, I want to say the approach of using exams to assess students. Again, I'm making it very clear that I have fully understood and appreciated the task language, the task requirements. I'm slightly paraphrasing, which is important, but you can see that I've understood the task properly. The approach of using exams to assess students has, here's a nice expression, instead of talking about a trend, we can say has risen in popularity, which is a trend. We're talking about something happening more often or more commonly than something else. And the than something else will be this part here, over the alternative of continual assessment. And when I say over the alternative, you can imagine that there is the word approach just in here. Alternative working like an adjective and approach working like the noun. But you don't actually need to repeat the word approach, and then alternative becomes the noun itself. So the approach of using exams to assess students has risen in popularity over the alternative of continual assessment. Notice, as I mentioned, in recent years being used with the present perfect. Okay? Then we can move into just one more sentence. We really only need 2 sentences when we're writing introductions, particularly if you're a confident and capable writer. You shouldn't really need 3. You should be able to cover this in just 2 sentences. And the second sentence will be a plan. This essay will, always the same when we're writing a plan, keep it simple. This essay will highlight, illustrate, discuss, explore, lots of different verbs you could use here. Both, because we're looking at 2 things, both the benefits and drawbacks that, let's go with the verb result from, and then we'll reference the word approach. We could say this approach, but I'm going to use such an approach, which we can also use as well. But one thing to notice here is the definite article. One of the most common errors that I see in this plan sentence is people will miss this definite article. So you're talking about specific benefits and specific drawbacks, those of using exams to assess students. They're not just random benefits and random drawbacks, they are specific. So we need a definite article almost all the time in that plan sentence. What you will see here is something that I have omitted. So you'll see what's actually not there. What is not there is an opinion. And there is no opinion here because there is no need for an opinion. We are not asked for our opinion. It's not a task requirement. So we can leave that out of the essay. If you want to include your opinion, you can add it in the conclusion if you wish, but don't include it earlier. It's just going to slow you down for no reason. You won't gain any extra marks. Band 7 for task response says that we need to present a clear position throughout the response. But if we are not asked for a position, then this plan is a way of presenting our position. Our position is to highlight both the benefits and drawbacks. So you're being very clear about your purpose here. And that's all that we need when it comes to an introduction for a discussion essay. So we can move into the body of the essay now, starting with body paragraph 1, and we can see from our plan over here that we're beginning with the advantages, and we can actually just say that we're beginning with the advantages with an expression like to begin with the advantages. Sounds super simple, right? Sometimes it is just like that in IELTS. Sometimes the simple approach is the best approach. I'm actually going to change the word advantages because I'm going to use the word advantage in a minute anyway, and I don't want to repeat myself. So another word we could choose is, wonder if you can work out what I'm going for here. The positives. The positives. It's not just an adjective, it works as a noun as well. So to begin with the positives, a crucial, and here's that word, advantage, a crucial advantage. Now we want to explain what we're talking about exactly, bring in the actual task itself. A crucial advantage that examinations have, and again, be even more explicit than that, show you understand the task requirements as a form of assessment. Yes, we're repeating some of the language here, but we didn't do it in the introduction, so it's not quite so obvious, and it makes it clear that we understand the task properly. That examinations have as a form of assessment is, so it's there's our subject, there's our verb, is that they, what have I got here? No room. So a nice verb to use, they leave. And I don't want to say no room. I put it in my plan, but we know that's not true. You can cheat anywhere if you have enough ingenuity and creativity, let's say, and a sneaky attitude, a sneaky personality. So we'll say little room for cheating. They leave little room for cheating. And that's all we want to write. Don't overdevelop your first sentence. If you have lots of ideas, break them up into separate sentences. This is one of the most common errors that I see, is that people try to include too much information within a single sentence. They want to include the point, they want to include the support of the point, they want to include an example of the point, all within one sentence. Break those ideas up. Really, really important. Okay, next sentence, we have a support sentence. Here we're explaining how or why they leave little room for cheating. So nice and simple. How do we answer a why sentence? Well, we say because. We don't want to begin with because, so we'll start with a this is because. This is because. This leaving little room for cheating is because exams, I've got the support sentence invigilator here. Exams are usually, nice verb, undertaken. So we undertake exams, undertaken in the nice noun of noun unit, the presence of another noun, of an invigilator. Be careful with the spelling on the word invigilator. On the presence of an invigilator. And now I'm going to use a relative clause just to explain what the job of an invigilator is. So we're going to use a comma and whose job it is to. That's a bit tricky, the grammar there, but if you follow it through, you can see that it works. Whose job it is to watch, but a verb detect would be better. Whose job it is to detect any, what do you call someone who does an exam? This is you yourself with IELTS. Candidate. To detect any candidate and breaking what? What's the collocation here? Breaking the rules. Very strong collocation. You break a rule. So breaking the rules. You're showing your collocation understanding there. We're moving over to an alternative. We're basically providing context here. So we start this with an in contrast to start an alternative sentence, alternative approach. In contrast, and we provide an example of what happens in continual assessment, and we contrast it against the previous point. So exams, no cheating. Continual assessment, lots of cheating. Continual assessment increases the risk, as I've put in the plan here, risk of plagiarism. increases the risk of plagiarism. Now, we can't just leave it there. We have to explain why. So we won't use because, we'll say since, just to mix things up. Since assignments, as I mentioned before, continual assessment is often to do with assignments, are often completed. I said in the company of the internet. That sounds a bit too humanistic, doesn't it? So we'll go with something like with the help of the internet. And the reader should be able to piece together that, of course, the internet is filled with opportunities for plagiarism. We don't have to be quite so direct there. Okay, we'll finish off with 2 more sentences, looking at one more advantage. The first one's going to be a nice short sentence. So we're going to say, besides reducing cheating. This is a nice thing to do. You don't just say on top of that or moreover or furthermore. You can, but if you want to emphasize the difference between the two, and if you also want to remind the reader of the previous point you've made, you can add it after besides. So besides the first positive. So besides reducing cheating, exams are also, what have we got down here? Time efficient. So more time efficient. And we don't need to say than continual assessment because we know we're comparing them with continuous assessment. It just appeared in the previous sentence. They're also more time efficient. Why is that? Well, this time, instead of saying this is because, I'm actually going to start with a because, although I'm going to paraphrase it to an as they tend to only appear once or twice a year, just like in the plan there, twice per year. Then we can reverse the order. They free up, nice phrasal verb here, like make available. They free up more time for students to revise, and another nice verb, prepare. Let's go with that. Okay, so instead of saying this is because they free up more time for students to revise and prepare because they only appear once or twice per year, we're just swapping the order around there so we avoid increasing that word count. Okay, let's have a look at the word count here. So you can see we're at 135. It's a really nice number. If we were to double that as we're halfway through, we would get to 270. And I try to keep essays within about a 10% increase. So aiming for 275 or under. Sometimes we will go over. We will go over that over the course of this course, by the way. But if we can keep it under, it's obviously better because it gives us more time to go back and check our work.